The radiator in the office had stopped working 3 winters ago, and Ray Delmont had never found the money to fix it. He kept a kerosene heater in the corner instead, the kind that smelled like burning dust and made his eyes water if he sat too close. It was enough to keep his fingers from going numb while he did the books, which was all he really needed. The garage itself stayed cold no matter what. Concrete floors, metal walls, and bay doors that let in the wind through gaps he'd stuffed with rags and old shop towels. It was a Thursday evening in late January, just past 6 o'clock, and Ray was alone. His only employee, a kid named Danny, who was 19 and eager but still learning the difference between a torque wrench and a socket driver, had gone home an hour ago. The last customer of the day had picked up her Honda Civic at 5:15, paying in crumpled 20s she'd counted out twice before handing over. Ray had given her a discount she didn't ask for because he'd seen the car seat in the back and the worry lines around her eyes. That was the problem with Ray. He'd been running Delmont's auto repair for 23 years, and he still hadn't learned how to stop giving things away. The shop sat at the edge of town on a stretch of county road that used to see steady traffic before the highway bypass went in 12 years ago. Now, most folks took the faster route, and the businesses that had once thrived out here, the diner, the feed store, the motel with the blinking vacancy sign, had all shuttered or moved closer to the interstate. Ray had stayed because the building was paid off, because his father had opened the place in 1974, and because he didn't know how to do anything else. He was reconciling the day's receipts, $387, not enough to cover the parts order due next week, when he heard the engine. It was a distinctive sound, unmistakable to anyone who'd spent time around motorcycles, a deep, throaty rumble that seemed to come from somewhere in the chest of the earth itself. Ray looked up from his paperwork and watched through the grimy office window as a single headlight cut through the darkness, swinging into his parking lot with a wobble that immediately told him something was wrong. The bike rolled to a stop near the first bay door, and the engine died with a cough and a sputter. The rider sat motionless for a moment, then swung one leg over and stood, his boots crunching on the frozen gravel. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and broad in a way that suggested muscle earned through labor rather than a gym. His leather jacket was black and worn, patches covering the back and shoulders, and even in the dim light Ray could make out the insignia, a skull with wings, flames curling beneath it, and letters that spelled out a name Ray recognized from news reports and police blotters: Hell's Angels, Oklahoma City chapter. Ray felt his stomach tighten. He was 61 years old, 5'8", with a bad knee and bifocals he kept losing in the clutter of his workbench. He had no weapons in the shop except for a tire iron and a can of WD-40. If this man wanted to cause trouble, there wasn't much Ray could do to stop him. But the man didn't move toward the office. He stood beside his bike, one hand resting on the fuel tank, his head bowed like he was listening to something only he could hear. After a long moment, he looked up and saw Ray watching through the window. He raised one hand, not a threat, just an acknowledgement, and waited. Ray could have pretended he was closed, could have turned off the light and locked the door, and hoped the man would move on. That's what a smart person would have done. Ray had never been accused of being smart. He pulled on his jacket and stepped out into the cold. The wind hit him immediately, slicing through the canvas like it wasn't there. He walked across the parking lot, his breath fogging in the air, and stopped about 10 feet from the stranger. "Engine trouble?" The man nodded. His face was weathered, deep lines carved around his eyes and mouth, a scar running along his jawline from the ear to chin. His beard was dark with streaks of gray, and his eyes, pale green, almost colorless in the low light, held the flat, assessing gaze of someone who'd learned to read people quickly and accurately. "Started knocking about 20 miles back," he said. His voice was low and rough, like gravel being poured into a bucket. "Thought I could make it to the city, but she had other ideas." Ray walked closer, his mechanic's instincts overriding his caution. He crouched beside the bike, a Harley-Davidson Softail, older model, well-maintained, but showing its age, and listened as the stranger turned the key. The engine turned over once, twice, then caught with a harsh metallic clatter that made Ray wince. "Kill it," he said. "You'll do more damage running it like that." The stranger complied. Silence fell over the parking lot, broken only by the wind and the distant hum of a truck on the highway. "What do you think? the man asked. Ray straightened up, his knee protesting as he rose. Could be a few things. Lifter, maybe. Could be a rod knock, which would be worse. Won't know for sure until I open her up. He glanced at the man's face, then away. You got someone you can call? Tow truck? Friend with a trailer? Not out here. The stranger looked down the empty road, then back at Ray. Club's in the city. 60 miles. I could call for a ride, but the bike would have to stay. I could take a look tonight. Might be something simple. The words were out before Ray could stop them. He saw the stranger's eyebrows lift slightly, surprise or maybe suspicion. Shop's closed, the man said. Sign says you shut down at 5. Sign says a lot of things. Ray shrugged. I'm here. Tools are here. Might as well see what we're dealing with. The stranger studied him for a long moment. Ray had the uncomfortable sensation of being measured, weighed, filed away in some mental ledger he couldn't see. What's your name? The man asked. Ray Delmont. I'm Cole. People call me Wraith. He extended his hand, massive, scarred across the knuckles, but the grip was controlled, careful. You sure about this, Ray? I know what that patch on my jacket means to most folks. Ray looked at the patch, then at the man wearing it. He thought about his father, who'd run this shop for 30 years and never once turned away a customer based on how they looked or what people said about them. He thought about his own empty waiting room, his dwindling customer base, the stack of bills on his desk that seemed to grow no matter how hard he worked. Patch doesn't mean much to me, he said. A man's got engine trouble. I fix engines. That's what I do. Something shifted in Cole's expression, a softening so slight Ray almost missed it. All right then, Cole said. Let's see what's wrong with my bike. They rolled the Harley into the first bay, and Ray got to work. He pulled off the inspection covers, checked the oil, listened to the engine at idle until the knocking revealed its source. It took him 2 hours to diagnose the problem. A collapsed lifter, just as he'd suspected, plus a worn cam chain tensioner that would have failed within another 100 miles. Good news is, I've got the parts, Ray said, wiping his hands on a rag. Bad news is, it's a 4-hour job minimum. I can have it ready by morning if you don't mind waiting. Cole had been sitting on a stool in the corner, watching Ray work with an attentiveness that bordered on unnerving. He hadn't complained about the cold or the wait, hadn't asked questions or made demands. He'd just watched, his green eyes tracking every movement of Ray's hands. How much? He asked. Ray did the math in his head. Parts, labor, shop time. By rights, he should charge at least $500, maybe $6. It was a fair price, maybe even low for the work involved. Tell you what, he heard himself say. You look like you've had a long night. Parts are going to run me about $80. Labor's on me. Cole's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Why? Ray set down the rag and leaned against his workbench. Because it's cold outside and you're a long way from home. Because my heater doesn't work and I'm going to be here anyway. And because... He paused, searching for the right words. Because my father used to say that the measure of a man isn't what he does when people are watching. It's what he does when nobody's around to give him credit for it. The shop was quiet. The kerosene heater hissed in the corner. Outside, the wind rattled the bay doors in their frames. Cole stood slowly, his full height seeming to fill the space. He reached into his jacket, and for one absurd moment Ray thought he might be reaching for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a phone. Old, battered. The screen cracked in one corner. I need to make a call, he said. You got somewhere I can do that in private? Ray pointed toward the office. Help yourself. Coffee's on the burner. Might be a few hours old, but it's hot. Cole nodded and walked toward the office, his boots echoing on the concrete. At the door, he paused and looked back. Ray. Yeah? I won't forget this. He disappeared into the office and closed the door behind him. Through the window, Ray could see him raising the phone to his ear, his lips moving in a conversation Ray couldn't hear. Ray turned back to the Harley and got to work. He didn't know what the phone call was about, didn't know what Cole was saying or to whom. He just knew that there was an engine that needed fixing and a long night ahead of him. By the time dawn broke over the county road, the bike was running smooth as new. Cole paid for the parts in cash, shook Ray's hand with that same careful grip, and rode off into the pale morning light without another word. Ray watched him go, then locked up the shop and drove home for a few hours of sleep. He figured that was the end of it, a strange night, an unexpected customer, a story he might tell Danny when the kid came in for his shift. He had no idea that the phone call Cole had made was already spreading through a network of garages and clubhouses across 3 states. He had no idea that the words spoken in that conversation, "I found someone worth knowing," would change everything. He just went home, made himself some eggs, and fell asleep in his recliner with the television on. Tomorrow, everything would be different. Ray woke to the sound of his phone ringing. He fumbled for it on the side table, knocking over a glass of water he didn't remember pouring, and squinted at the screen. It was Danny. "Boss, you need to get down here." Ray looked at the clock on the wall. It was just past 7 in the morning. He'd been asleep for less than 3 hours. "Danny, I told you I'd be in late today. Had a long night." "I know, but..." The kid's voice cracked with something Ray couldn't identify. Excitement? Fear? "There's people here, Mr. Delmont. A lot of people. They're asking for you." Ray sat up, his back protesting the hours he'd spent hunched over Cole's engine. "What kind of people?" "Bikers." Danny lowered his voice to a near whisper. "Like, a lot of bikers. They just keep coming. I don't know what to do." Ray was already pulling on his boots. "Don't do anything. Don't say anything. I'm on my way." He made the drive in 12 minutes, a trip that usually took 20. His old Ford pickup shuddered over the potholes on the county road, and his mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Maybe Cole had been unhappy with the work after all. Maybe the repair had failed somewhere down the highway, and now his club was here to express their displeasure. Maybe Ray had made the worst mistake of his life by letting a stranger into his shop after hours. But when he crested the small rise that led to Delmont's auto repair, he saw something that made him pull over to the shoulder and just stare. The parking lot was full, not just full, overflowing. Motorcycles lined every inch of available space, their chrome glinting in the pale morning sun. They spilled out onto the gravel shoulder, onto the dead grass beside the road, onto the cracked pavement of the old diner parking lot next door. Ray tried to count them and gave up somewhere past 100. And standing among the bikes, clustered in groups of 5 and 10, were the riders. Men and women in leather and denim, their breath fogging in the cold air, their faces turned toward the road as if waiting for something. Or someone. Ray pulled back onto the road and drove the last quarter mile with his heart hammering against his ribs. As he turned into the lot, heads swiveled in his direction. The crowd parted to let him through, and he found a spot near the bay doors that someone had clearly left open for him. He climbed out of the truck on unsteady legs. Danny was standing by the office door, his face pale, his eyes wide as dinner plates. "I didn't know what to tell them," the kid said. "They just started showing up about an hour ago. First it was maybe 20, then 50, then..." He gestured helplessly at the sea of motorcycles. "It's okay, Danny." Ray wasn't sure if that was true, but it seemed like the right thing to say. "Go inside. I'll handle this." The kid didn't need to be told twice. He disappeared into the office, and Ray heard the lock click behind him. Ray turned to face the crowd. Up close, he could see the patches on their jackets. Different clubs, different chapters, some from as far away as Texas and Kansas. There were Hells Angels, Road Saints, Iron Horsemen, Banditos. Clubs that, according to everything Ray had ever heard, didn't exactly get along. And yet, here they were, standing side by side in his parking lot, waiting. A figure separated from the crowd and walked toward him. It was Cole, Wraith, wearing the same jacket as the night before, his face unreadable in the morning light. "Morning, Ray." "Cole." Ray's voice came out steadier than he felt. "You want to tell me what's going on?" Cole stopped a few feet away and turned to survey the crowd behind him. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the lot. "These men and women are here because of you, because of what you did last night." "I fixed your bike, that's all." "No." Cole shook his head slowly. "That's not all. You let a stranger into your shop after hours. You worked through the night in a freezing garage. And when it came time to settle up, you charged me $80 for parts and nothing else." He paused. "You didn't know who I was. You didn't know if I could pay. You just saw someone who needed help and you helped." Ray shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't a big deal. It was to me. Cole's voice dropped, and for a moment, Ray saw past the hard exterior to something more vulnerable beneath. "I've been riding for 30 years. I've broken down in a lot of places, met a lot of people. Most of them see the patch, and they see trouble. They see something to be afraid of, or something to hate, or something to call the cops about. He met Ray's eyes. "You saw a man with engine trouble. That's it. That's all you saw." Ray didn't know what to say. He stood there in the cold morning air, surrounded by more motorcycles than he'd ever seen in one place, feeling like he'd stepped into someone else's life by accident. Cole reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "After I left your shop, I made some calls, told some people about what happened. Word spread faster than I expected." He handed the paper to Ray. "This is for you." Ray unfolded it with fingers that trembled slightly. It was a list, handwritten, covering both sides of the page, with names, phone numbers, and dollar amounts. Some entries were $10, some were $50, a few were several hundred. At the bottom, someone had tallied the total. $14,600. Ray looked up, certain he'd misread. "I don't understand." "The clubs took up a collection. Everyone who's here today contributed, plus a lot of folks who couldn't make the ride." Cole's expression softened slightly. "We heard about your shop, Ray. We heard about the bypass killing your business, about the customers who don't come around anymore, about the parts orders you can barely afford. We heard about the discounts you give to single mothers and the free work you do for folks who can't pay." Ray felt his throat tighten. He'd never told anyone about those things. He'd never wanted credit or recognition. It was just what you did. "How did you... small towns talk and bikers listen." Cole gestured at the crowd behind him. "These people aren't here because I asked them to be. They're here because they heard your story and they wanted to help. That's how it works with us. Someone does right by one of our own, they become one of our own. And we take care of our own." A woman stepped forward from the crowd. She was in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a braid and a leather jacket covered in patches from a club Ray didn't recognize. "My husband broke down outside Tulsa 3 years ago," she said. "Middle of nowhere, middle of the night. A mechanic just like you stayed open late to fix his bike. Didn't charge him a dime." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded check. "I've been waiting for a chance to pay that forward. This is it." She pressed the check into Ray's hand. He looked at it. $500 made out to Delmont's Auto Repair, and felt something crack open in his chest. Another rider stepped forward, a young man with tattoos climbing up his neck and a shy smile that seemed out of place on his hardened face. "I grew up in foster care," he said. "Aged out at 18 with nothing. The only job I could get was at a shop like this, working for a guy who didn't care about my record or my past. He taught me everything I know." He reached out and shook Ray's hand. "Places like yours matter, man. People like you matter." One by one, they came forward. A truck driver who'd been stranded on this very road 10 years ago and remembered the mechanic who'd helped him. A nurse who'd grown up in this town and still remembered Ray fixing her father's car for free when money was tight. A retired Marine who said he could always tell a good man by the way he treated people who couldn't do anything for him. Each of them had a story. Each of them had a reason for being here. And each of them pressed something into Ray's hands. Cash, checks, business cards with promises of future work, handshakes that conveyed more than words ever could. By the time the last rider had spoken, Ray was openly weeping. He stood in the middle of his parking lot, surrounded by strangers who had become something more, holding a stack of money and checks that represented more than he'd made in the past 6 months, combined. "I don't know what to say," he managed, his voice rough. "I don't know how to thank you." Cole stepped forward and placed a hand on Ray's shoulder. The weight of it was solid, grounding. "You don't have to thank us, Ray. You just have to keep doing what you've always done." He looked around at the crowd, at the motorcycles, at the small garage that had stood on this forgotten stretch of road for nearly 50 years. "This place matters. What you do here matters. And as long as you're open, you'll never be alone again." He reached into his jacket one more time and pulled out a small metal pin, a skull with wings, the same design as the patch on his jacket, but smaller, meant to be worn on a lapel or a hat. "This is for you," Cole said. "It's not a membership. We don't do that for outsiders, but it's a symbol. It means you're under our protection. Anyone who sees this pin will know that you're a friend of the club, and they'll treat you accordingly." Ray took the pin and held it in his palm. It was warm from Cole's pocket, small and surprisingly heavy. "I don't know if I deserve this," he said. "That's exactly why you do." Cole smiled, a real smile, the first Ray had seen from him. "Now, you got a coffee pot in that office of yours? We've been riding since before dawn, and these boys and girls could use some warming up. Ray laughed, a sound that surprised him with its fullness. Coffee I can do. Danny. The office door cracked open, and Danny's pale face appeared in the gap. Yeah, boss. Start a fresh pot. Actually, start 3. We've got company. The morning unfolded like nothing Ray had ever experienced. Bikers filed into his shop in groups, warming their hands by the kerosene heater, drinking coffee from mismatched mugs, swapping stories about the road and the repairs they'd needed over the years. Some of them asked Ray about his work, about his father, about the history of the shop. Others wandered through the bays, examining his tools with the appreciative eye of people who understood what good equipment meant. Danny, once he got over his initial terror, turned out to be a natural host. He refilled coffee cups, answered questions, and even showed a few of the younger riders how the lift worked. By noon, he was laughing and joking with men who had scared him speechless just hours before. And Ray just moved through it all in a daze, shaking hands, accepting thanks, trying to comprehend how a single act of kindness on a cold Thursday night had led to this. Around 1 o'clock, Cole found him in the office, staring at the stack of money on his desk. You okay? Ray looked up. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up, that this is some kind of dream. It's not a dream. Cole leaned against the doorframe. It's just what happens when good people find each other. The world tries to keep us apart, tells us to be afraid, to look out for ourselves, to see strangers as enemies. But every now and then, someone breaks through. Someone does something that reminds us who we're supposed to be. He nodded toward the money. That's what you did, Ray. You reminded us. Ray was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into the stack and pulled out a handful of bills. This is too much, he said. I can't take all of this. You can, and you will. Cole's voice was firm but kind. But if it makes you feel better, I've got an idea for what you can do with some of it. What's that? Cole smiled. There's a single mother about 3 miles from here. Drives a beat-up Pontiac that's been making a noise for 6 months. She can't afford to get it fixed, and she's scared it's going to die on her one of these days, leave her stranded with her kids. He raised an eyebrow. Think you might be able to help her out? Ray looked at the money, then at Cole, then at the crowded shop beyond the office window. He thought about his father, about the lessons he'd learned in this very building, about the kind of man he'd always tried to be. Yeah, he said. I think I can do that. Cole nodded, satisfied. That's what I thought. Now come on. There's about 50 people out there who want to shake your hand, and you've got a reputation to live up to. Ray followed him out of the office, into the noise and warmth of the crowded shop, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he didn't feel like a man struggling to keep his head above water. He felt like exactly who he was supposed to be. The riders began to leave around 3 o'clock, their engines roaring to life one by one, filling the cold afternoon air with thunder. Each one stopped by Ray before departing. A handshake, a nod, a few words of thanks or encouragement. Some pressed more money into his hands. Others left business cards with promises to send work his way. A few just clapped him on the shoulder and said nothing at all, their silence carrying more weight than words. Cole was among the last to go. He stood beside his Harley in the fading afternoon light, helmet in hand, watching the final stragglers pull out of the lot. You did good today, Ray. I didn't do anything. You're the one who brought all these people here. I made a phone call, that's all. Cole pulled on his helmet and swung a leg over his bike. What happens next is up to you, but I've got a feeling you'll figure it out. He kicked the engine to life, smooth and strong, no trace of the knock that had brought him here, and raised a hand in farewell. Then he was gone, joining the river of chrome and leather, flowing down the county road toward the highway. Ray stood in the empty parking lot, watching until the last taillight disappeared over the rise. The silence that followed felt strange after so many hours of noise and activity. The shop seemed smaller somehow, quieter, like a room after a party when all the guests have gone home. Danny appeared in the doorway, a broom in his hands. That was crazy, boss. Yeah. Ray turned and looked at the kid, really looked at him, maybe for the first time. Danny was young, still figuring out who he was, but he'd handled today with more composure than Ray would have expected. You did good in there, kept your head. Danny shrugged, but Ray could see the pride in his eyes. Just did what you always tell me, treat everyone like they matter. That's right. Ray walked past him into the shop, surveying the mess left behind. Coffee cups, cigarette butts, boot prints tracked across the concrete. Come on, let's clean up. Then I've got something I need to do. They worked in comfortable silence for the next hour, sweeping and straightening and returning the shop to its usual state. By the time they finished, the sun was setting behind the old water tower, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Ray locked up the cash and checks in the office safe. He'd count it properly tomorrow, figure out what to do with it, and grabbed his keys. You need a ride home? He asked Danny. Nah, my mom's picking me up. She wants to hear all about it. The kid grinned. She's not going to believe me. Tell her I said thanks for lending you to me. I will, Mr. Delmont. Danny hesitated at the door. Hey, boss. Yeah? What Cole said about you being under their protection now, what does that mean? Ray thought about the pin in his pocket, the weight of it against his leg. I don't know exactly, but I think it means we're not alone out here anymore. Danny nodded slowly, processing this. Then he waved and headed out to the parking lot, where a minivan was just pulling in. Ray watched him go, then climbed into his own truck and headed in the opposite direction. The address Cole had given him was about 3 miles down a side road Ray hadn't traveled in years. The houses out here were sparse and run down, set back from the road on plots of land that had once been farms but were now just scrubby fields dotted with rusted equipment. The kind of place people ended up when they had nowhere else to go. The Pontiac was parked in front of a single-wide trailer with peeling paint and a roof that sagged in the middle. It was an older model, maybe early 2000s, with a cracked windshield and a front bumper held on with bungee cords. Even from the road, Ray could hear the engine ticking as it cooled, the distinct sound of a lifter problem, similar to what Cole's bike had suffered. He pulled into the driveway and killed his engine. For a moment, he just sat there, working up the nerve. He wasn't good at this kind of thing. The showing up, the offering help without being asked. His father had been better at it. His father had known exactly what to say, but his father wasn't here, so Ray would have to figure it out himself. He climbed out of the truck and walked toward the trailer. Before he could reach the door, it opened, and a woman stepped out onto the small wooden porch. She was young, maybe 30, maybe younger, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and tired eyes that held a wariness Ray recognized, the look of someone who'd learned that strangers usually meant trouble. Can I help you? Ma'am, my name's Ray Delmont. I run the auto shop out on County Road 7. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, keeping his distance. I heard you've been having some trouble with your car. The woman's expression shifted, suspicion giving way to confusion. Who told you that? A friend. Ray glanced at the Pontiac. That knocking sound, it's probably a lifter. Could be the timing chain, too. Either way, it's not safe to drive much longer. The engine could seize up on you without warning. I know. The woman crossed her arms against the cold. I've known for months, but I can't afford... She stopped, her jaw tightening. Look, I don't know what you're selling, but I'm not interested. I'm not selling anything. Ray reached into his pocket and pulled out the pin Cole had given him. He wasn't sure why. It just felt like the right thing to do. I'm just a mechanic who had a very strange day, and someone told me you could use some help. The woman looked at the pin, then at Ray, then at the Pontiac sitting in her driveway like a time bomb. Her expression cycled through suspicion, hope, and something that looked almost like fear. Why would you help me? You don't know me. No, I don't. Ray put the pin back in his pocket. But someone helped me today. A lot of someone's, actually. And they didn't know me either. He nodded toward the car. I can have it towed to my shop tonight. Fix it up. Have it back to you by the weekend. Won't cost you a dime. That's not... The woman's voice cracked. She pressed a hand to her mouth and turned away, her shoulders trembling. I'm sorry. I don't mean to. It's just been... I know. Ray didn't move closer, didn't try to comfort her. He just waited, giving her the space to feel whatever she needed to feel. Take your time. A small face appeared in the window behind her, a child, maybe 5 or 6, with the same dark hair as her mother. The girl pressed her palm against the glass, watching Ray with wide, curious eyes. The woman took a breath, steadied herself, and turned back to face him. Her eyes were red, but her voice was stronger when she spoke. I'm Maria. Maria Santos. She came down the porch steps and extended her hand. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to thank me. Ray shook her hand gently. Just promise me you'll pass it on someday. Help someone else when you're able. That's all I ask. Maria nodded, tears still streaming down her cheeks. I promise. Ray called a tow truck, one he'd worked with for years, owned by a man named Hank who owed him a few favors, and arranged to have the Pontiac picked up that evening. While they waited, Maria invited him inside for coffee, and he met her daughter, Sophia, who was shy at first, but warmed up quickly when Ray produced a peppermint candy from his jacket pocket. Magic trick, he said, pretending to pull it from behind her ear. My daughter used to love that one. Maria looked up from the coffee she was pouring. You have a daughter? Had. Ray accepted the mug she offered. She passed away about 12 years ago. Car accident. She was 19. The trailer fell quiet. Sophia, sensing the shift in mood, retreated to a corner with her candy and a coloring book. I'm so sorry, Maria said softly. It was a long time ago. Ray stared into his coffee. Her name was Emily. She was stubborn and kind and had this laugh that could fill up a whole room. After she died, I didn't know how to keep going. Didn't see the point, really. The shop felt empty. Everything felt empty. He looked up at Maria, at this stranger who'd invited him into her home, and found himself saying things he hadn't spoken aloud in years. But then I realized something. Emily would have been angry at me for giving up. She would have told me to stop feeling sorry for myself and go help somebody. That was who she was. Always looking out for other people, always finding ways to make things better. He set down the coffee mug. So that's what I've been trying to do ever since. Fix what's broken. Help where I can. It's not much, but it's something. Maria was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. I think your daughter would be proud of you. Ray felt the familiar sting behind his eyes, the one he'd learned to push down over the years, but this time he didn't fight it. I hope so, he said. I really hope so. The tow truck arrived an hour later. Ray supervised the loading of the Pontiac, gave Hank instructions for where to leave it at the shop, and promised Maria he'd call as soon as the repairs were done. Thank you, she said again as he climbed into his truck. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come. You would have figured something out. People like you always do. Ray started the engine. But you don't have to figure it out alone. Not anymore. He drove home in the dark, the headlights cutting through the empty countryside. The pin was still in his pocket, a small weight against his leg. He thought about Cole, about the riders who'd filled his parking lot, about Maria and Sophia, and the broken Pontiac that would be running again by the weekend. And he thought about Emily, about the daughter he'd lost and the lessons she'd left behind. The world was hard. He'd known that for a long time. But every now and then, someone did something unexpected, fixed a stranger's bike, showed up with a small army of support, offered help without being asked, and for a moment, the hardness cracked open just enough to let the light through. Ray pulled into his driveway and sat in the truck for a long time, looking up at the stars through the windshield. Tomorrow, he'd go to the shop and fix Maria's car. He'd count the money in the safe and figure out how to use it wisely. He'd call Danny and tell him to come in early because there was work to do. But tonight, he just sat in the silence and let himself feel something he'd almost forgotten how to feel. Gratitude. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity, unlike anything Ray had experienced in years. Word of what had happened at Delmont's auto repair spread through the county like wildfire. First through the biker community, then through the churches, then through the local news stations that sent reporters to interview the quiet mechanic who had fixed a stranger's bike and received an army in return. Ray hated the attention. He stumbled through the interviews, gave one-word answers whenever possible, and refused to let anyone take his picture unless Danny was standing next to him. He's the future of this place, Ray told the reporter from Channel 9. If you're going to put someone on camera, put him. But the attention brought something else. Customers. For the first time in over a decade, Delmont's auto repair had more work than it could handle. Cars lined up in the parking lot, waiting for service. The phone rang so often that Ray finally broke down and hired a receptionist, a retired schoolteacher named Gladys, who had a voice like warm honey and no tolerance for nonsense. The money from the bikers' collection went into a separate account. Ray used some of it to fix the radiator in the office, to replace the worn-out lift in Bay 2, and to give Danny a raise that made the kids' eyes go wide. but most of it he set aside for something else, a fund he'd been thinking about ever since that night in Maria's trailer. He called it the Second Mile Fund. The idea was simple. Anyone who came to the shop and genuinely couldn't afford repairs could apply for assistance. Ray would cover the cost of parts and the labor would be free. No questions asked, no strings attached. The first recipient was Maria Santos, whose Pontiac Ray had fixed the week after the biker's visit. True to his word, he hadn't charged her a cent. The car ran better than it had in years, and Maria had cried again when she came to pick it up. But this time, the tears were different. "I'm going to pay this forward," she'd told him, gripping his hand with both of hers. "I don't know how yet, but I will." "I know you will," Ray had said. "That's why I helped you." The second recipient was an elderly veteran named Harold, who lived alone on the outskirts of town and drove a truck that was older than Danny. The third was a young couple with a baby on the way and a transmission that had given out 3 months before their due date. The fourth, fifth, and sixth were a blur of faces and stories, each one carrying the same weight of desperation and hope. Word spread. People started showing up at the shop not just for repairs, but to contribute to the fund. A farmer dropped off a $100 bill and refused to give his name. A group of teenagers from the local high school held a car wash and presented Ray with a coffee can full of crumpled bills and loose change. The Methodist Church took up a special collection and sent a check for $2,000, along with a note that read, "For the work you do in his name." Ray didn't know what to do with any of it. He'd never been comfortable with praise or recognition. He just wanted to fix cars and help people and be left alone. But the world, it seemed, had other plans. One afternoon in late February, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. It was cleaner than most vehicles that came through. No rust, no dents, no desperate sounds from the engine. Ray watched through the office window as a man in a suit climbed out, looked around the lot with an expression of mild distaste, and walked toward the front door. "Can I help you?" Gladys asked when he entered. "I'm looking for Raymond Delmont." The man's voice was smooth, polished, the voice of someone used to getting what he wanted. "I'm from Garrett Development. We'd like to discuss a business proposition." Ray emerged from the back, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd heard of Garrett Development. Everyone in the county had. They were the ones who'd built the shopping center out by the highway, the ones who'd been buying up land all over the area for the past few years. "I'm Ray. What can I do for you?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Delmont, my name is Philip Warren. I represent a group of investors who are very interested in this property. We're prepared to make you a generous offer, well above market value, for the land and the building." Ray didn't blink. "It's not for sale." "I understand your attachment to this place. Your father built it, correct? There's history here, sentimental value." Warren pulled a folder from his briefcase and set it on the counter. "But sentiment doesn't pay the bills, Mr. Delmont, and from what I understand, your bills have been piling up for quite some time." "Not anymore." Warren's smile flickered. "Yes, I heard about your windfall, the bikers, the donations, the media coverage, very heartwarming." He tapped the folder. "But windfalls don't last, Mr. Delmont. Customers are fickle. Attention fades. In 6 months, a year, you'll be right back where you started, struggling to keep the lights on, watching the world pass you by on that highway bypass." Ray looked at the folder, then at Warren, then at the shop around him. He thought about his father, who'd built this place with his own hands. He thought about Emily, who'd learned to change a tire in Bay 3 when she was 12 years old. He thought about Danny and Maria and all the people who'd passed through these doors over the past 50 years. "Mr. Warren," he said slowly, "I appreciate you coming all the way out here, but this shop isn't just a business to me. It's not a piece of property or an investment opportunity. It's my family's legacy. It's where I learned who I am and what matters in this world." He pushed the folder back across the counter. "So with all due respect, you can take your offer and drive it back to wherever you came from. This place isn't for sale. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." Warren's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Mr. Delmont. The development is going forward with or without you. This whole stretch of road is going to be transformed. If you don't sell now, you'll be surrounded by construction, cut off from customers, squeezed out by progress." He picked up the folder and tucked it back into his briefcase. "I'll leave my card. When you change your mind, and you will, give me a call." He walked out without another word. Ray watched the SUV pull away, its tires kicking up gravel, and felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Danny appeared at his elbow. "Who was that?" "Trouble," Ray said. "Or at least the start of it." That evening, after the shop had closed and Danny had gone home, Ray sat alone in the office with the kerosene heater hissing in the corner. He stared at the business card Warren had left behind, thick cardstock, embossed lettering, the kind of card that cost more to print than some people made in a day. He thought about what Warren had said, about windfalls not lasting, about attention fading, about being squeezed out by progress. The man wasn't wrong. Ray had been in business long enough to know how these things worked. Developers had deep pockets and long memories. They could make life very difficult for anyone who stood in their way. But Ray had something they didn't. He had a community that had shown up for him when he needed it most. He had a pin in his pocket from a man who'd promised that he'd never be alone again. And he had a stubborn streak a mile wide that he'd inherited from his father and never managed to shake. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd memorized, but never expected to use. Cole answered on the second ring. "Ray, didn't expect to hear from you so soon." "I need some advice," Ray said. "There's a developer trying to buy my land. Says the whole area is being transformed, that I'll be squeezed out if I don't sell." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What's the developer's name?" "Garrett Development. Guy named Philip Warren came by today." Another pause, longer this time. "I know that name. Give me a few days. I'll ask around, see what I can find out." "I appreciate it." "Ray," Cole's voice was serious. "Whatever happens, don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. These guys play dirty, and they don't like being told no. But you've got friends now. Remember that." Ray looked around the empty shop, the tools on the walls, the lifts in the bays, the faded photograph of his father hanging above the register. "I remember," he said. "Thanks, Cole." He hung up and sat in the silence for a long time. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the bay doors in their frames. The old building creaked and groaned, the sounds of a structure that had weathered 50 Oklahoma winters and was settling in for another. Ray didn't know what was coming. He didn't know if Cole could help, or if the developers would make good on their threats, or if everything he'd built would come crashing down around him. But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to give up without a fight. He turned off the heater, locked the office door, and drove home through the dark. Tomorrow, there would be cars to fix, and customers to help, and a fund to manage. Tomorrow, there would be problems to solve and decisions to make. But tonight, he allowed himself to believe that everything might just work out. It was enough to get him through the night, and sometimes that was all you needed. 3 days later, Cole called back. "I did some digging," he said without preamble. "Garrett Development has been buying up properties all along that stretch of road for the past 18 months. They've got plans for a mixed-use development. Shopping, restaurants, some residential units. Your shop is right in the middle of their footprint." Ray sat down heavily in his office chair. "So Warren was telling the truth. They're going to build around me." "That's the plan, but here's the thing. They can't force you to sell. Oklahoma law protects property owners from that kind of pressure. They can make your life difficult, sure. They can build right up to your property line, block your sight lines, make it hard for customers to find you. But they can't take what's yours. Small comfort if nobody can get to my shop." "That's where it gets interesting." Cole's voice carried a note of something Ray couldn't quite identify. Satisfaction, maybe, or anticipation. "Turns out Garrett Development has a history of cutting corners. Code violations, safety issues, a few lawsuits that got settled out of court. They're not as clean as they like to pretend. What does that mean for me? It means they've got vulnerabilities, and it means they might be more willing to negotiate than Warren let on." Cole paused. "I've got a friend who's a lawyer, specializes in property disputes. She's agreed to take a look at your situation pro bono. Says she owes me a favor from way back." Ray shook his head, even though Cole couldn't see him. "I can't ask you to do all this. You've already done more than enough." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Cole's tone left no room for argument. "Besides, this isn't just about you anymore. Word's gotten around about what you've been doing, the fund, the free repairs, the people you've helped. A lot of folks are invested in seeing you succeed. They're not going to let some developer push you out." Ray thought about Maria, about Harold, about all the faces that had passed through his shop in the past few weeks. He thought about the Second Mile Fund and the coffee can full of crumpled bills from the high school kids. He thought about his father, who had stood in this very office 50 years ago and made a decision to build something that mattered. "Okay," he said. "Tell your friend I'd be grateful for the help." "Good. Her name's Rebecca Tran. She'll be in touch." The call ended, and Ray sat alone in the quiet shop, staring at the phone in his hand. Outside, the February wind howled against the bay doors, carrying with it the promise of another cold night. But inside, something warm was building, a sense of possibility he hadn't felt in years. Rebecca Tran called the next morning. She was brisk and professional, with a voice that suggested she didn't waste time on pleasantries. Within 10 minutes, she'd gathered more information about Ray's situation than he'd managed to piece together in 3 days of worrying. "Here's what I'm seeing," she said. "Garrett's been aggressive, but they haven't done anything illegal yet. The offer Warren made was lowball, about 60% of your property's actual value. They're betting you don't know that." "I didn't. Most people don't. That's how they operate." Ray could hear papers shuffling on her end. "The good news is you have options. You can hold firm, wait them out, see if they blink first. You can negotiate for a better offer if you decide you do want to sell. Or, and this is the interesting one, you can organize." "Organize?" "Rally the community. Get other property owners on the same page. If Garrett's facing unified opposition, instead of picking off individuals one by one, their calculus changes." Rebecca paused. "Cole tells me you've got a lot of goodwill built up around here. That's not nothing, Mr. Delmont. That's leverage." Ray thought about the bikers who'd filled his parking lot, the donations that had poured in, the customers who'd started coming back after years of driving past. He thought about the people he'd helped and the people who'd helped him, the web of connections that had grown up around his little shop on the forgotten stretch of road. "What would organizing look like?" he asked. "Town meeting. Get everyone in a room, business owners, residents, anyone who'd be affected by the development. Let them know what's happening, what their options are. Give them a chance to have their say." Rebecca's voice softened slightly. "I've seen this work before, Mr. Delmont. When communities come together, developers pay attention. They don't like bad press, and they don't like organized resistance. It costs them time and money and goodwill." Ray was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've never organized anything in my life. I fix cars. That's what I know." "You fixed a stranger's bike and ended up with 250 bikers in your parking lot. I'd say you know more about bringing people together than you think." The town meeting was held on a Saturday evening in early March in the basement of the Methodist church that had contributed to the Second Mile Fund. Ray had spent the week making calls, knocking on doors, spreading the word to anyone who would listen. He'd expected maybe 20 people, the business owners directly affected, a few curious neighbors, maybe some of the folks he'd helped through the fund. Instead, the basement was packed. They came from all over the county, farmers and teachers, mechanics and nurses, retirees and young families. Some Ray recognized, most he didn't. They filled the folding chairs and lined the walls and spilled out into the hallway, their voices buzzing with conversation and concern. Ray stood at the front of the room, his hands shaking slightly, and looked out at the sea of faces. He'd never been much of a public speaker. He preferred the quiet of the shop, the honest work of engines and transmissions, the conversations that happened one-on-one over a cup of bad coffee. But these people had shown up for him. The least he could do was show up for them. "I'm not going to pretend I know how to do this," he began, his voice rough. "I'm a mechanic. I fix things. That's what I've done my whole life, what my father did before me. But lately, I've been learning that some things can't be fixed alone. Some things need a lot of hands working together." He told them about Garrett Development, about Philip Warren's visit, about the plans to transform the whole stretch of road. He told them about his conversation with Rebecca Tran, about the options they had, about what organizing might look like. And then he told them about the bikers. "A few weeks ago, I fixed a stranger's motorcycle. Didn't charge him for the labor because it was cold outside and he was a long way from home. I didn't think much of it at the time. It's just what you do. But the next morning, 250 people showed up at my shop. People I'd never met, from clubs I'd never heard of, all because one man made a phone call and said he'd found someone worth knowing." Ray's voice steadied as he spoke, drawing strength from the memory. "That's when I realized something. We're not as alone as we think we are. There are people out there, good people, kind people, who are just waiting for a reason to show up. All we have to do is give them one. He looked around the room, at the faces turned toward him, at the community that had gathered in a church basement on a Saturday night because they believed in something bigger than themselves. I'm not asking you to fight for me. I'm asking you to fight for each other, for the businesses that have been here for decades, for the families who've built their lives on this land, for the idea that progress doesn't have to mean tearing down everything that came before. He took a breath. I don't know if we'll win, but I know that if we stand together, they'll have to listen, and that's a start. The room was silent for a long moment. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single person began to clap. Another joined, then another, until the basement was filled with applause that rattled the windows and brought tears to Ray's eyes. The meeting lasted another 2 hours. People shared their stories, their concerns, their ideas. Rebecca Tran explained the legal options. A retired journalist offered to contact the local news stations. A group of business owners formed a committee to coordinate their response. By the time it was over, they had a plan. Not a perfect plan, nothing ever was, but a plan nonetheless. A starting point. A reason to believe that the fight wasn't over before it had begun. Ray was the last to leave. He stood alone in the empty basement, folding chairs stacked against the walls, the lingering smell of coffee and determination in the air. His father's voice echoed in his memory. The measure of a man isn't what he does when people are watching. It's what he does when nobody's around to give him credit for it. He'd spent his whole life trying to live up to those words, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe he was getting close. The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and newspaper articles. The local news picked up the story. Small-town mechanic rallies community against developer. And suddenly, Ray's face was on television screens across the state. He hated every minute of it, but he endured because he understood what Rebecca had told him. Attention was leverage, and leverage was power. Garrett Development responded exactly as she'd predicted. First came the lawyers, with cease and desist letters that Rebecca swatted away like flies. Then came the PR campaign, painting the company as a benevolent force for progress, and Ray as a stubborn obstacle standing in the way of jobs and growth. Then came Philip Warren himself, requesting a private meeting to discuss a more equitable arrangement. Ray agreed to the meeting, but he didn't go alone. He brought Rebecca and Danny and Maria Santos and Harold the veteran and a dozen other people whose lives had intersected with his over the past few months. They filled Warren's conference room, their presence a silent reminder that Ray spoke for more than just himself. The negotiation took 3 hours. Warren pushed and prodded, offered and threatened, deployed every tactic in his considerable arsenal. But every time he thought he'd found a crack in their resolve, someone spoke up. A story of struggle, a testimony of help received, a quiet declaration that this community would not be bullied. In the end, Garrett Development agreed to modify their plans. The development would proceed, but Ray's shop would be protected. A guaranteed access road, a buffer zone, a written commitment that Delmont's auto repair would remain untouched for as long as Ray wanted to keep it open. It wasn't total victory. The landscape would still change, the highway bypass would still carry most of the traffic, the world would still keep spinning toward a future that didn't look much like the past, but Ray's shop would survive. The Second Mile Fund would continue, and the community that had come together in a church basement would remain connected, bound by something stronger than geography or circumstance. On the day the agreement was signed, Cole rode into town with a small group of his brothers. They parked their bikes in the lot, cleaner now, freshly paved with some of the donation money, and walked into the shop like they owned the place. "Heard you won," Cole said, shaking Ray's hand. "We won, all of us." Cole smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. That's how it's supposed to work. They stayed for a few hours, drinking coffee and telling stories, filling the shop with laughter and the smell of leather. When they finally left, Cole pressed something into Ray's hand, a small bronze coin, worn smooth with age. "What's this?" "Sobriety chip. 20 years. Cole's voice was quiet. "I got it from a man who saved my life when I was at my lowest. He told me to pass it on when I found someone who understood what it meant to keep going when everything says you should quit." Ray looked at the coin, then at Cole. "I can't take this." "You already have." Cole clapped him on the shoulder. "Take care of yourself, Ray, and take care of that kid of yours. He's going to do great things." He walked out into the afternoon sun, mounted his bike, and rode away. Ray watched until the sound of engines faded into silence, then looked down at the coin in his palm. 20 years of sobriety, 20 years of fighting to stay alive, and now it was his, not because he'd earned it, but because someone believed he understood what it meant. He slipped the coin into his pocket next to the pin and went back inside. There were cars to fix, customers to help, a legacy to protect, and somewhere out there, another stranger was breaking down on a cold night, hoping someone would open a door. Ray would be ready.